Welcome to the other side of the coin, where we add new perspectives for you to make more powerful decisions in your financial world. Today's guest is a good friend of mine, Michael Deutsch. An entrepreneur at heart, Michael helps business owners gain more traction by helping them implement EOS, aka the Entrepreneurial Operating System. Additionally, Michael is also the co-founder of Sapphire Talent, a new startup aimed at revolutionizing the hiring process. In today's episode, we'll explore the real drivers of a successful company, its people. Michael gives us an inside look at how leaders set the tone for culture, how teams thrive when everyone is in the right seat, and why owners who spend all day fighting fires often miss the strategies that create long-term growth, stability, and freedom. This is a conversation about elevating how your company operates so your business can finally rise with you. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce certified EOS implementer and co-founder of Sapphire Talent, Michael Deutsch.
Michael, welcome to the Other Side of the Coin podcast with Zach and I. We've had, I think it was actually just last episode, we had two Zachs on. Now we have two Michaels. I guess it's a Mike and a Michael. But
Mike and a Michael,
we like to do two of, one, there's an odd man out every single conversation, it seems.
Well, I'm balancing out the previous two Zachs, so I feel good. Bring balance to the universe.
Next episode, we can reset now.
Maybe I don't know what we'll do. We'll keep everyone, episode 6, stay tuned for how we're going to balance everything out. But so Michael, I think that you know what's coming. We start every single episode with the same question, and I'm really excited to talk all things people with you. We've already been driving for probably the past 10, 15 minutes here about our love of people and the different thinkers of people and organizations. But this is a podcast about finances. And so would love to know, what was your relationship with money when you were growing up?
So I didn't grow up in a very wealthy household. I think my relationship with money was one such that, we were, I would call us lower middle class. So we were always paying attention. We were always on top of where we were spending, how we were spending. I didn't have everything every kid ever wanted, which I actually think benefited me in the long run as I got older, as I had children of my own, and understanding a little bit of the value of a dollar. It's also changed my opinion of money throughout my life, and where comfort is in my world compared to where my parents felt comfort, if that makes sense.
How would you say that informed I know a lot of people who come from a scarce background around money, or even lower middle, maybe not poverty, but lower middle class level of income, that really money starts to be the thing that runs your life. Would you say that informed your career choice in any way, at least initial career choices?
It's interesting that you bring that up. It's something that I've really been unpacking a lot in my personal world over the last year or two. I guess being a little bit on the vulnerable side, trying to understand this. I actually grew up in a very wealthy community. We weren't the wealthy ones in the community, obviously. So there was, for a long time, there was a bit of resentment against that, or against not the wealth, but the people that had the wealth and the attitude that came from it. So I ended up for many years rebelling against that, with an attitude of, I don't care and I don't fear that. And so it's interesting because it did create this sort of a little bit of backlash or animosity from me towards the people that had for many years in my career. And I dealt with that over time. What I didn't realize until recently was that it actually gave me the entrepreneurial spirit. Because in my mind, I said to myself, if they can do it, I can do it. And so I was never satisfied, not so much with the money and the wealth, as much as the ability to do that, to have that freedom, to create that world for myself.
And Zach, you feel free to chime in if I'm not going in a direction that feels most suitable to you, but
Yeah.
I'm really drawn to this because I think it's such a, I think a lot of people look at financial advising as a profession as something that is for the wealthy and or
Yeah.
helps the wealthy be wealthier. And it's what you said something really powerful there, that if you knew on some level, if they can do it, I can do it. Where do you think that insight came from? Because I think if you have the mindset that I might not have the wealth, but I know that it's in me, then that's the most important thing for living an inner and outer wealthy life.
I actually just want to add to that. Where did it come from? And I'm curious if you had like certain role models in your life that
Hmm.
you followed, kind of both of those questions.
So I think, initially the ambition and the drive came from that negative space of I don't ever want to feel the way that I did as a kid, which felt a little less than, felt like I didn't belong in this community. So I wanted to create that space for myself. Over time, as I processed that, it's turned more into, well, then how can I help others? I know it seems like there's a little bit of a stretch. There's a little bit of a leap in there. But really, it did shift at some point in time from becoming about myself and how do I never put myself in that position to how do I help others feel free? How can I help them um, get what they want, get what they need, and not have, for lack of a better term, that head trash or that negative self-speak going on in their world. And we all have that head trash, that negative self-speak. And so my goal for myself and for others is how do we eliminate that and live more in the positive?
Hmm. You mentioned entrepreneurial spirit. Was it entrepreneurial spirit? I think that's the way you phrased it, or like an
Could be.
entrepreneurial
I
mindset.
may not have said those words, but in
Just close
essence,
enough.
yes. Yeah.
Yeah, could you lay out to us what that, when you say that, what does it mean to you?
So the entrepreneurial spirit to me is one of freedom, to
Hmm.
be honest. It's freedom of time. And Dan Sullivan in Strategic Coach talks a lot about four freedoms, right? But for me in particular, it is the freedom of time. It's the freedom of relationships. Um, yeah, it's freedom of money to some extent, but I'm just going to go with the word freedom, right? It's really the ability to live my life the way that I feel that I want to live my life with those freedoms. Being entrepreneurial, starting entrepreneurial businesses has allowed me to spend a lot of time with my kids as they were growing up. Not that I didn't work, of course I worked, but when you're an entrepreneur, you have the ability to manage your own time, right? So I think that the entrepreneurial spirit for me was driven by the freedom of wealth, back to what I was talking about before, the freedom of time, the relationships that I want to have with people, and the impact of an entrepreneurial business on my relationships for the good and the bad. Because anyone who's ever started a startup knows that it can be grinding. It can have impact on your relationships, and it shouldn't. And that's not why people get into business. That's the side effect of that sometimes. Well, that entrepreneurial spirit really encapsulates all of that for me.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I would even say, knowing Michael as well as I do and the work that he does, and that's kind of where our two worlds collide, where we're working with business owners on their finances and Michael's working with business owners inside of their companies. I know kind of the theme of today's conversation was people. And I think that Michael being an entrepreneur and going through, the progressions of his career and his life, both professionally and personally as well. I would love to hear, Michael, how you take that and you bring that to your clients, right? Because I know there's such a focus on people. And
Yeah.
I think, what you could speak to, and feel free to expand upon this, but by improving upon the systems and the relationships of the people inside of the company, I think I'm just kind of connecting some dots here. I think that what that really provides for the people and the owners of these businesses is that freedom, right? Where so many business owners, they kind of have that hub and spoke model where everything's on their shoulders. I think you're kind of bringing that entrepreneurial mindset to the table to teach others how to access more freedom in their life.
Yeah. So, entrepreneurial mindset is not about, people tend to confuse it. They think entrepreneur or entrepreneurial mindset means startup. So people that have not been entrepreneurs kind of equate those two, and that's really not what it is. It's a mindset in general, the things that I talked about before. And when I work with my clients, one of the things that I tell them is, I know because I've been there, I've been an entrepreneur, I still am an entrepreneur, I've started businesses. You don't start a business to feel weighed down. You start that business because you want those freedoms. You have this vision in your mind of, I'm going to start a business and I'm going to be successful and I'm going to have time, or the ability, the freedom to go see my kids play in their baseball game or basketball game or, in their play. And I have the ability to take those vacations. But the reality that ends up happening is you get so tied into that business and you lose track and lose focus of that vision that you had that caused you to be that entrepreneur in the first place, that your day-to-day, your life becomes your business, which then impacts everything else. It impacts all of your relationships, friends, family, kids, you name it. It's all impacted. And I often tell people, this is not the reason that you started the business. And that's where I come in as an EOS implementer to try and help them recover that vision and get to where they want to go, that they're not there now.
Could you talk about the entrepreneurial operating system a little bit more? I think that's a good segue into it. Like
Sure.
what is that as a framework?
Sure. Entrepreneurial Operating System, it stands for, it's EOS, right? So it stands for Entrepreneurial Operating System. And the way that I like to describe it is that it's a framework or a methodology for how to run a business. And the easier way sometimes when I try to frame it is that, people tend to be very good at the business of the business, what they do, right? Zach might be a great financial advisor, and doctors could be great doctors. Lawyers are great lawyers, and accountants are great accountants. What they're not often are great business people. And it's not through any fault of their own. They didn't go to business school. They didn't sit at leadership in other organizations. They started a business and they grew the business and it got a little bit out of control. And then what, right? So now back to what we were talking about a couple of minutes ago, which is now they're tied to that business and their whole life is wrapped up there and they're working 15, 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, and they're miserable. What EOS does is it comes in and it really addresses that issue, the business side of the business that you run. And it's a framework, as I mentioned, or a methodology. And I like to think of it as, and I've been to business school, so I understand that. I read a ton of business books and Harvard Business Review articles. In my opinion, I think that there's probably 10 to 20 core concepts that exist out in the business world. Everything from culture and management philosophies and how to do processes and how we look at data and analyze data in an organization. Core concepts around these with variations of that. So, we were talking about Adam Grant. So if you're into culture and people of an organization, you might have Adam Grant and you might have Simon Sinek or Brene Brown or Kim Scott or, I can rattle off tons of them, right? And they all have their own variation and their own perspective, and each one's slightly different, or in some cases very different, but it's all off these core concepts. What EOS has done is taken a lot of these core concepts and we've simplified it down, and we put it together into a whole system, a holistic system that we bring into organizations to help these owners and these leadership teams really run a more efficient business. So it's almost like going to business school and having it customized for your organization. And we touch on just about every aspect of your business.
That's awesome. And yeah, Adam Grant, Brene Brown, you're speaking not only my language, but I know definitely Mike's language.
Is up there.
All my heroes making it into one conversation. Go ahead.
Seriously. So I actually have a question for you though on that. So once again, I'm always, I go through my own experiences, and I know when we're working with business owners, a lot of the times it's starting with the exit of the company and almost reverse engineering back to where we are today, and then, being able to carve out that roadmap for them so that they can actually realize the exit that they dream of, right? So my question for you, though, is I'm curious, you're doing such high-level work with these businesses, and some of these businesses are, at a very large scale. I always like the saying how execution is more important than strategy, although both are important. How are you keeping a busy business owner's, focus and attention, and how do you keep them and their other key people accountable to be moving in the direction that you're trying to guide them into?
It's a good question, and there's no simple recipe for it. So a big part of what EOS brings in is that focus and that prioritization around a focus. Within the first couple of days when we step into an organization, it's let's define the focus. A good portion of that is through the vision of the organization, where we're going to define this vision, get into some detail around that, and that then becomes the greater good of the company. So then we start thinking about, okay, well, any decision that we make, big decision, because I'm working at the leadership level here, so we're not talking lower decisions within the organization that are driving the business forward, but any large decision should be for the greater good of the company. What's the greater good? It's this detailed vision that we came up with. And that's the greater good of the organization, because we're looking at, long term into the intermediate, into the short term, how we're going to get there, that vision that they've defined, that becomes the focus, because that's the priority that you defined. So that becomes the focus. The real question that you have is accountability. How do we drive that accountability? Right? And it starts with the leadership team, and very often with the organizations that I step into, that's one of the biggest challenges, and that's, this is back to the people side of the equation again. One of the biggest issues that I face when I walk into a company is accountability from the people in the organization, very often starting at the leadership level, where even the leadership team don't know how to hold themselves or each other accountable, no less everyone else that works in the organization. And so from day one, we start trying to drill this concept of accountability and give tools. That's the thing about EOS, is we also have a lot of tools that we bring into place with our clients. We bring these tools to bear. And these tools really help to drive that accountability, because once we can get that accountability in place, then of course productivity is going to jump. Right? So if everyone's being held accountable, that productivity is going to leap. Or the flip side of it, unfortunately, is some people don't want to be held accountable. And some people can't hold others accountable. And in some cases, we end up finding out that the people are not a right fit for our organization, and then we're forced to make decisions. I mean, that's what happens sometimes when we go in, and that's the unfortunate truth of that. However, as you've heard, I'm sure you've heard this before, which is not every organization is a right fit for every person. And very often what happens is that's best for everyone, because we find out that those people were really unhappy to begin with, and it's one of the reasons why they weren't being held accountable or driving their own accountability.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like either way, it's a healthy growth exercise. And I think that everything you said is great and so valid and true. One of the things that really stuck out was actually one of the first things that you said, which is how you first focus on their vision. And I feel like if you can tap into, the emotional side of a business owner or, even their key people, a lot of the times that's like the driving factor of, to keep somebody's attention, is when they can really feel kind of the internal impact that it's going to have on them, on their future, on their vision, on their freedom, right? It's kind of all the psychological side of it also.
Yeah, most entrepreneurs, or a lot of entrepreneurs, I shouldn't say most, but a lot of entrepreneurs don't actually have a real vision. They have an idea of what they want to accomplish. And they may have, when I say vision, they may have a vision, a picture in their mind of what it should look like, but they've never formally defined it. Maybe they've defined something relatively short term or intermediate, if you will, like a year out, but they don't know where the company wants to go or should go, or where they want it to go in 5 years or 10 years, right? Or 15 years if you're a little bit more of a mature company. So they need to really get that out. The best part about what we do in EOS is that this becomes a group exercise at the leadership level. So we get the leadership level to come together to define that vision. It's not just the owner or owners if there are multiple, but it's the entire leadership team, because what we're looking for is team effort. We're looking for buy-in and collaboration. So the entire leadership team comes together to help define this long-term vision, which then sets the priorities. And of course, if everyone is contributing to that vision, they're bought in, it's easier for them to drive that vision through the organization. And when we're starting at the leadership level, that's exactly what we're looking for. It has to start there. So they have to drive it from underneath, and it starts by having that buy-in. I mean, Zach, look, you run an organization. Do you have a vision? What does it work? What does it look like on your end?
Yeah, and I think once, you have a lot of people pulling in the same direction, that's where you start accessing multipliers, right? That's where you start accessing like compounding growth. Yeah, certainly. I mean, our vision as a company is, we have a mission where it's really twofold. One has to do with freedom, right? So that's kind of like a nice recurring theme of today's conversation. And I think something else that you spoke about, and for us and our clients, whether it's personal or business, we always talk about the mission of avoiding failure, right? So I think so many people, they have these large aspirations. At the end of the day, as long as we're achieving our goals, that can be a win, right? Do we want to take all the risk in the world to get to a certain level, or are we looking to get to the level that's going to actually make us happy? So I think that's a big part of our vision. And as we're scaling our company up, we're trying to impact that on as many people as possible. That's really where we're leading with all this at this point.
And that's really the key, is how do you impact that, right? How do you impact that? How do you and Mark impact that in your organization? That's the key, right? And so when you're able to get that buy-in at the leadership level, and then you can drive that through the company with that same vision, and vision can be anything, by the way, including core values. So do your core values align? Does everyone align with your core values? That's all part of vision. So it's not just, the financial number I want to hit in 10 years.
Absolutely. And I'll even add one more layer on top of this. And Mike Trugman, I'm sure you have a multitude of questions for everybody right now. But
of course,
I think it's so interesting where it's like you have the vision, but then you also have the mechanics, right? So it kind of goes back to what I was saying before, hub and spoke, where it's like you can have an amazing vision and you have an amazing mission, but if you don't have the time carved out to actually see it to fruition, and I think that's really the importance, kind of going back to Michael and EOS, having a team all pulling in the same direction, all aligning with the vision, it can free up the time of, some of the other leaders so that they can actually drive with force, seeing that vision actually come to life. Because if you're working 15 to 20 hours a day, like Michael was saying, and you just, you have your head down on a computer all day, it's going to be very hard to drive impact. So I think all these kind of layers start, playing with each other a little bit.
You're not seeing the bigger picture. And that's part of it too. When I speak with a lot of owners, and their heads down all day long, they're not able to think strategically about the organization. It's not just owners, but it's leadership teams as well. They're not able to think strategically because they're so busy dealing with the tactical. They're so busy dealing with all of the little things going on in the organization that they can't take that step back, think strategically about industry and market changes, about product fit, about anything else that they need to be strategizing around to get to the vision that they've defined for themselves. You want to achieve, and again, vision doesn't necessarily mean a certain dollar amount within a certain period of time. For a lot of people these days, it's building the organization that you want to build. That could be cultural, it could be social impact, it could be dollars, it could be anything, right? But if you can't take a step back and have time and space to think about how you're going to get there, and you're just dealing with the nitty-gritty day-to-day, it's never going to happen because you're never going to see the angles and the strategies. You're just thinking here and now, and you can't think forward.
Last item on this, I recently read an interview from Jeff Bezos, and what he was saying was how he actually has a slow start to his day, and he makes certain that by the time he's ready to work, his plate is clean, his plate is cleared, so that he can give himself the time to be creative and think about the bigger ticket items. If there's something that needs to be done in a tactful way, right, hopefully he has the team to do that. That shouldn't even get to his desk. It's really the bigger, more complicated things, and he needs the space to, be strategic about it, not just be in the business all the time.
And there's countless books and philosophies back to core concepts, right? But you have everyone from Jim Collins in Good to Great, who talks about the right people on the bus, to Dan Sullivan in Who Not How, and a multitude of people in between. That's all what it comes down to, is do you have the right people in the organization doing the right jobs to help you get there, so that you're able to focus on the things that you need to focus on. It's not about them doing the work. It's about everyone has a role to play in the organization, right? And so are you able to play your role at the leadership level in the organization, the role that you need to play to be able to get to the next level?
So this actually brings me to a curiosity that I have, because we're in a group of three people where you say the names Brene Brown and Dan Sullivan, Simon Sinek, and Adam Grant, and we're like, yes, these are pioneers of people. And yep. I imagine, as someone who personally studies behavior change, a lot of times, and there's a saying, what got you here won't get you there.
Yep.
a lot of times when they've deeply grooved into their brain, into even their nervous system in a lot of ways, like they're so used to working the 16-hour days, 7 days a week. It's hard for them to let go of that, right? So these are all beautiful things for us to take in right now. I'm a firm believer in everything that we've been speaking about. And if I stand in as the maybe leader who's not open to this, I'm sure you get plenty of people like that. And so what does a conversation with that type of person look like?
Yeah, I would love to hear Michael's answer. I just want to jump in and say it's people almost can identify with these habits, right? Like a stressed out person is always going to be stressed, and a happy person is always going to be happy. So it really, I'm interested to hear what
and
Michael
you can glorify it, right? Like that. I work those hours because like no one else is willing to do that.
For sure.
My answer to that may not be one that you like. I deal with it a lot. I often feel like I'm a business therapist. Right? I'm sitting in the room with my clients, feels sometimes like a therapy session, and I'm the therapist. If someone is not ready to make the change, then there's nothing that I can do, and there's nothing that anyone else can do. They have to be ready to make that change themselves. Sometimes they're in denial. Sometimes they say, we need to make the change, and then you get in the room with them, and they're really not willing to do the work. Sometimes they're in such pain that they're desperate to make the change, but they just don't know how. Sometimes they live in fear of making the change because if I let go, everything's going to fall apart, which to me, that fear is based on trust, right? And I would tell you that a lot of times when we're talking about delegation in an organization and getting to the right people, the who's, the fundamental issue there, in my opinion, is one of trust. If you trust the people and you trust that they know how to do it, you're going to let go or be more willing to let go. It may take you a little bit of time, but you'll get there. If you don't trust them, you're not going to let go, no matter what, no matter how good they may be. But if you don't trust them, you're not going to let go. So there's a lot of, there's not always a great answer to that, Zach, because not everyone is ready. They may say they're ready, but they're really not. And sometimes it takes a while to get there. Sometimes it could take a year or 2 years or more for them to really be in enough pain to recognize that something has to give and I have to change. A lot of times then that comes with really challenging decisions that they have to make.
It's interesting. I was just reflecting on my own life when you were saying what you were saying. And I grew up in a family with two extremely hardworking parents. They are just some of the hardest workers that I know. And, that's who I grew up with as my role models. Both my mom and my dad, super hard workers. And when I started working, throughout my entire life, but also professionally when I started working, I was the person who would somewhat glorify, working a 16-hour day, right? Like that's what it takes. That's what you have to do. And I one time had a coach tell me that the harder you work, all it means is that you have bad systems. Like the harder you work, the worse your systems are. If you have great systems, you don't have to work as hard. But just being vulnerable and open and honest here, I do the hard work. I have these conversations. I think about these things, and I still find myself going back and forth, right? Like there's some days where I'm really leaning into like the systems, and I don't need to work 16-hour days. And then there's other days where I work 16 hours, right? And I'm kind of, I feel like I have one foot on both sides of the fence sometimes. Just interesting to think about.
Listen, even the coaches, they say therapists have therapists, even coaches have coaches, because I get stuck with that too. It's like you, hardworking parents. I explained a little bit of my background, and I was very hardworking. I was the guy that would put in 16-hour days without a thought, and I have funny stories around some of that stuff too. But even now, it's hard to turn off sometimes at night or on the weekends because it's not that I believe that I have to. It's just ingrained in me that I want to, that I just feel the pull of work. And I have to sometimes fight it. And, I have my implementation director, Tammy, who you've met, I think. And she's spectacular. And I've learned to delegate. She's the perfect who for me. And I've learned to delegate a lot to her to allow me the freedom to be able to do other things, to take time and not think about what's going on in my business behind the scenes, because I know she's got it, and if there's something critical, she'll reach out to me. But that's back to the getting the right who's and trusting that person and making sure that you can delegate to them. And really, it all starts with you, right? You have to make those changes. You have to be willing to make the change. You have to want to make the change, and then you have to actually go through with it. And it all starts with you.
Could
Right,
you
that's that execution
share,
part.
of
Yeah.
course. Tools got mentioned, and I think
Yeah.
that's always a good low-hanging fruit, for someone who's listening, and it's like, this all sounds great, and I would love to be able to delegate some more stuff and trust in my employees a little bit more and create more freedom in my life. What are some of the tools that you find helpful to implement some of the change that we're talking about here?
So for this topic, the two tools that I really lean into in the EOS world, the first one would be what we call your accountability chart. So it's kind of like an org chart on steroids is kind of the way that I look at it, right? It works a little different. I tell people all the time, visually it looks like an org chart, but it functions very differently than that visual org chart. But what it does is it helps to, one, define the functions and the roles within an organization so that when you actually start looking at the people and who are performing those functions, you know whether they're a good fit. What we also do in EOS is there's another tool that we call the People Analyzer. So the People Analyzer, one side actually ties back to that accountability chart and those roles. And so when you actually look at a person and you say, is this person really good at their job? That's the skills side of things. We call that the right seat. Are they in the right seat? Are they good at what they do? The flip side of that, which we really haven't spoken much about yet in this conversation, is core value fit and the critical nature of core values within an organization. You have to make sure that everyone in your organization fits your core values. That's the culture of your company. And it's not just concept. It's not just principles like high trust and great customer service and all of those we call permission to play, all the ones that you hear everyone out there talking about. You have to get to the real true core values of your organization, because once you define that, what core values end up being are a set of behaviors, not just the concepts. And I can believe in something, but if I don't act that way, am I living that core value? And everyone needs to live the core value. So we have a second tool that we call the People Analyzer that looks at the employees, looks at the people in the organization, top to bottom, by the way. Leadership team goes through this as well. And we're asking, on the one hand, are these the right people? Are they good, are they perfect core value fits? Or not perfect, but are they good core value fits for our organization? And are they in the right seat? So we start there and looking at that. Now, sometimes you get someone who's right people, so their core value fit. We love them, we want to keep them, but they may be in the wrong seat. So we have to switch them around, right? And part of that sometimes comes from this other tool that we call Delegate and Elevate. And so Delegate and Elevate is really taking a look at all of the items that everyone works on, or an individual works on in a given time period, usually about a week, and putting them into, it's 4 quadrants on the page, but putting them into these 4 quadrants that help you to understand, is this something that I love doing, that I'm great at doing? Do I just like it and I'm good at it? Do I not like it, and I'm good at it? Or, do I hate it and I'm terrible at it? And obviously, if you hate it and you're not good at it, you shouldn't be doing it. So that's the first thing that we need to think about delegating off of your plate. That might involve a seat change. But if you're at the leadership level, as I talk to leaders and owners of the business, well, that's a perfect or a prime candidate. That specific task is a prime candidate to delegate to someone else who is good at it and who does like doing that. And people often think that, well, am I delegating my horrible work to someone else? So the answer is no, because everyone functions differently, right? The things that I don't love to do, Tammy, my implementation director, loves that stuff. Right? Loves it. There are people that hate numbers. There are people that love numbers. So if I hate numbers and I have to take care of that, but I have somebody on my team who loves numbers, maybe I should let them do it. And so but that gets back into the trust situation. And do you have the right people? Are the right people in the right seats? And if they are, then I have the trust and I can delegate to them. So these are just a couple of the different tools that we have and different ways of using them.
So those 4 quadrants and I don't know if you're familiar with Gay Hendricks' work, but he talks about the zone of genius, the zone of excellence, the zone of competence, and the zone of incompetence. And I don't know, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I imagine a lot of leaders are actually spending a lot of time doing things that are in their zone of excellence. And that's where they get it's certainly zone of competence, but probably some zone of excellence stuff, and not really focusing on where do I generate the most value in the least amount of time, maybe. So I'm
Yeah.
wondering if you could bring us closer to what does it look like if you're working with leaders who are, they're actually doing things that they quite enjoy and are good at, but maybe it's not the things that they're best at. Is that a bottleneck in any people you work with?
It could be. And you're getting into, I think, a little bit of a gray area of what's best to do. Is it best to do something that I love or best to do something that I'm best at? And I don't think that there's a real true answer to that. I think that comes from within the individual. I know that it might be a non-answer for you.
That's
Putting
helpful.
myself in those shoes, I'm not sure what the right answer was for me, and it took me a while to figure out who that was for me, because there were things that I was really good at, but did I love doing it? I don't know, right? In EOS, we say that you want to be in that love and great. So I want to love it and I want to be great at it. And so maybe it's a little bit of both. Maybe you need to be living in that place that you're passionate about what you're doing and you're really, really good at it. Not just I'm good at it, but I don't love it, but really love and great.
Yeah, and just Mike, did you have more that you wanted to follow up on with that?
I have lots of notes here, so I want to kind of zig and zag around, but you go ahead.
Well, what I was going to say is it also makes me think of the business owner who might be great at a profession or great at doing something, and they kind of find themselves to be a business owner one day, but maybe they're not, maybe that's not their skill set. What I was going to say, and this is maybe segueing a little bit, but Mike, feel free to bring us back after this question, is a lot of what I'm hearing of the EOS work that Michael brings to the table for the clients. It almost sounds like you're helping these companies and these clients and these business owners and leaders evolve. Like I'm hearing a lot of that. You're helping them evolve to get to the next level. And I also know, Michael, that you have continued to evolve. And I actually thought maybe this would be a good opportunity to just explain like how you've evolved. And I know you've added to kind of the work that you already have been doing for, a very long time. And it's all kind of like value adds and adding to the next step of what business owners might need. So I thought maybe this would be a good time to talk about that.
Yeah, that would be great. You gave me a lot over there, Zach. Thanks. So just to start, what EOS implementers do when we enter a relationship with our clients, and again, we only work with the leadership team. And what we do is we say that we're teachers, facilitators, and coaches. And very early on, we're teaching. We're teaching EOS. We're teaching the system and the model and putting tools in place and helping them learn how to use the tools and making sure that they're doing it really well and getting the value and the benefit out of having the system in their organization. Over time, that teaching component of EOS becomes less and less. We become professional meeting facilitators. Like I said, that's the business therapy portion of it, combined with the coaching aspect where we coach them through the challenges of the business, acting as a facilitator and coach in the room. And so I often say, look, EOS is a journey. And we say it, various points in the EOS process, but I really hit it home hard because it is a journey. You can't start EOS or anything in one day and expect to be a pro at it. It's an evolution. That goes from personal growth, professional growth, team growth, organizational growth. Nothing can be changed in a day. So I tell people very clearly, expect to go on a journey. It's a ride. The length of time of that ride is entirely up to you. But that it is a journey. And there's going to be ups and downs, and just like every other ride. And so expect to be on the ups and expect to be on the downs, and then we're going to rebound and come back up. So it is a journey, and it takes time to get there. In terms of personal development on my end, are you talking about Sapphire and the new business that
That's what I was thinking about, because I feel like it's kind of one of the, sectors that you're adding, tremendous value in above and beyond. Like you're having business owners realize, hey, I need to fill up all these buckets, and then you can actually help with that.
Yeah. So, let me give you, I guess, just a little bit of the background because you asked about the evolution of this. So, I've always been fascinated with the concept of personal growth and cultural impact on organizations. During COVID, if you remember in March of 2020, when the world essentially shut down, and everyone moved to Zoom and networking groups, I had this idea and I created a networking group of job seekers. I'm going to give you the background of it, right? So created this networking group of job seekers, and the idea initially was that all of these people are suddenly out of work, and everyone says the best way to get a job is to network, to go to your network and to talk to people. And I had this idea that, well, job seekers have networks too. Why shouldn't they network with each other to leverage each other's networks instead of just going to, hey, Zach, I know that you own a company. Do you have any openings? And go to the people that are currently employed. Why don't they work with each other? So I built this networking group. And speaking of evolutions, right, it evolved over time very quickly to one of more of an advisory type of group where everyone was there to support each other. Because if you remember back in the COVID days, there was a lot of anxiety and a lot of stress, and people didn't know what to do, and people lost their jobs, and they may not have ever needed to look for a job. This is the first time they're ever out on the job market. So we ended up bringing in professionals to help with everything from resume writing, interview skills, LinkedIn profiles, social media in general, a lot of therapists to come in to talk about stress and mindfulness and all of that. But very often, especially towards, I guess as the world was starting to open up, people were going through interview processes, and they would come into my group on a weekly basis, and they would tell me things like, I had the best interview. They told me I'm going to hear back by the end of the week. I'd be shocked if I didn't get it. And then 2 weeks later, ghosted. They don't hear from anyone. And it was frustrating to watch from the other end. So fast forward a little bit, I end up in EOS, very little bit, right? Because I started my EOS journey in the middle of COVID, my personal EOS journey. And I'm still pondering this and still thinking about it. And there has to be a way to fix this, and the hiring process is broken. And I quickly realized that the greatest impact that I can have on the hiring process is by working with businesses. That's what I do. I'm essentially a business coach on the EOS side and facilitator coach. I can have the greatest impact by working with leadership teams. That's an evolution, and starting a new business is thoughts and ideas and iteration and all of these different concepts. And it took a while for me to land on what I felt like could have the greatest impact, both to the employer and to the employee. Because at the end of the day, the measure of success for everyone is a successful hire. And from an EOS perspective, and by the way, I'm talking successful over time. I'm not talking about day one, because we just don't know at day one. But the measure of success from the employer side is, I've brought this person in and they're a perfect cultural fit, core value fit. They're great at their job. They've been here for 3 years. They're phenomenal. We love them and hope they stay for life. The flip side is, if you're the candidate, is 3 years later, I love this organization. I love the people. I love the culture. I love my job. I love coming to work every day. That's great for the candidate. It's a win-win, right? That's what we're looking for. And so, the evolution of this was, in EOS, we look at people in an organization, and we often look at, well, what is the percentage, for lack of a better term, of right people, that core value fit, and in right seats, being good at their jobs. And you want to have a high percentage of that, right? I'd love to have 80, 90% of everyone in the organization being great core value fit and being really good at their job. And I quickly realized, back to what I was talking about before, which is that the root cause of people issues in an organization was probably a bad hire in the first place, right? We made a mistake. Perhaps they made a mistake, meaning the candidate chose to take the position. They didn't have enough information and it wasn't a good fit. So how can I improve upon that? How can I fix that? And so that's where Sapphire Talent, the new company that I've just started, steps in, which is we've reimagined the hiring process so that we can improve the success rate both for the candidate and for the employer on both sides, right? And we're not going to get into, when we could, but we could talk about production and profitability impact of having right people in an organization. That's from the company side of things. But isn't it just nice to go to work and be happy and not feel like you work in a toxic environment? And so the way to do that is to make sure that you're hiring in the right place to begin with. So Sapphire Talent, its entire mission is to reimagine the hiring, the how we go through the hiring process. The what of what we do in the hiring process stays the same. You're always going to need to attract talent and review resumes and interview, and you're going to have to go through that process, but how we go through that and the mindset shifts that need to happen within the organization, because that's really where the control is in this process. The mindset shifts that need to happen and how we approach hiring in an organization and how we go through the interview process and how we use data and AI tools within this process to make sure, not to make sure, but to do a much better job at bringing in the right people into the organization, which then improves that culture and improves people being really good at their jobs, improves the environment, improves productivity, improves profitability, drives just a great organization, the one that you're looking to build. I know that was a long answer. Sorry.
It's a great one. I have a tactical question for you, Michael. I think,
That was an
Zach,
interesting story. I didn't know the background.
it's a fascinating story. And as a tactical follow-up to that question, and Zach, you'll probably have some good insight into this question as well. I imagine that having the insight around the need for Sapphire and the way that you're able to execute it is a natural result, not a natural result, but only was possible because you created some amount of space in your life to think about, what are some of the challenges that people are facing right now? And so my tactical question is like, what conditions did you create in your life such that you were able to have enough space, were you like, do you have a dedicated amount of time on a daily, weekly, monthly basis that you're envisioning things? Like, what does it look like for you?
So there's a couple of answers to that. The first answer is that COVID gave me a lot of space to think, right? Like everyone else, I was stuck home for months at a time. So I had a lot of space to think, and I would ponder that question of why are these candidates struggling so much, and why are they being ghosted, and there's something wrong here, there's something broken here. And it went through many iterations in my head until I figured out that it's really the hiring process itself. In my head at some point there was, well, what if I created a staffing agency that did this, but did it differently than what's currently out there? Didn't feel right. And again, that's the entrepreneurial journey, which is you go through those iterations until you land on something that feels right. And so that space was there. Now, things are a little different because as an EOS implementer and with a fairly full practice, I don't necessarily have the time. So we do what we call clarity breaks. And so I have 2-hour block every Friday in my calendar just to think, just my calendar actually says educational research, but it's really a clarity break, right? Because sometimes it does go into, that's a great idea. And then my mind is off and running and I'll spend a little time researching and reading and maybe buying a book or reading a book or I don't know, something to come up with it. And it's literally every Friday that I have that space blocked. And I need that because without that, then I'm not getting the clarity that I need to try and drive this vision forward or any vision for that matter, including in my EOS practice.
In the interest of time, I'm going to ping pong around a little bit here because I have a couple of other things that I think are core. Well, speaking of core, that are central and core to you, and core values have come up a couple of times.
Yeah.
And the first time you mentioned it, you actually alluded to, we haven't really gotten into this. So it seems like something that you could spend a lot of time talking about. I'm wondering, this is a two-parter, so you can answer either or both. What do you think is so important about establishing core values? And then how do you look at establishing the set of behaviors? Because I know a lot of companies that espouse certain values that are not actually living and breathing them. And so what are how do you look at establishing sets of behaviors in addition to just having the core values?
So I think, look, the first step here is to understand, it's a mindset shift that has to happen at the leadership level. And this is something that I hit very early on in the EOS journey, which is that, look, core values on paper sound like great concepts, right? Well, let me back up. The first thing that we do when we actually set core values are true core values. Are you living these core values? And it sounds very innocent as we say it, but it's not really so innocent because, as I said before, initially it comes off as principles or concepts. And I look at them and, I'm saying, all right, can you guys actually make decisions around this? Because they become a set of behaviors. Do you want to have people in the organization that live these core values? Or are you okay accepting people that are going to not live these core values, which it doesn't really show the importance of how strong the core values need to be. And the idea here is, and I actually had a LinkedIn post this week with a little blurb that says, what we tolerate is what we endorse, right? So if you're willing to tolerate someone who violates your core values, those behaviors, you're endorsing that behavior. And so again, it's behavioral. That's the key to it in my mind is core values are not just concepts, but they're behaviors, and they have to be reinforced. And it starts at the leadership level, just like parents, right? If your parents are not living a core value, the children are going to follow the parents' example. So if the leadership level is not living a core value, well, of course, the rest of the organization is going to follow that example as well. So it has to start at the leadership level, and then we actually have to go through the organization and make sure everyone is exhibiting and living the core value, really taking it seriously, because if they don't, then we're not going to get that core value fit in the organization, the culture that we're looking to build. You know, the early creation of the core value is only a part of the battle. The rest of it is living and breathing it day in and day out of the organization. That's the key to it. There are different models that I've seen, um, core values within an organization, and then drive that down to individuals within the organization, right? So when you're looking at the culture and the culture that you want to build within the organization, and then the people and how they live and perform within the organization as tied to the organizational strategy around culture. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
I know it sounds very...
No, that definitely makes sense. I think that is a deeper level than a lot of businesses and business owners are operating on or thinking about.
Yeah.
That really goes deep into the core of the business.
Yeah. Actually, I have a slide here I'd actually like to show you. And I can talk you through it really quickly, because I think it's really important that people understand. Hang on, let me see if I can pull this up. Give me a second, guys.
Yeah, and for those who are on audio right now, so we're also available on YouTube. So not only should you listen to us on audio, but you should also check us out on YouTube. So that's first things first. And second of all, there's a screen share that Michael will now walk us through here.
Yeah, so the first thing that we're looking at here is that on the x-axis it's about healthy, and that's the cultural component of your organization, and then you have intentionality on the y-axis. And so the world that we want to be living in is this upper right quadrant where high intentionality, high health. So we've intentionally built a strong culture of a company. And this is what we're talking about when you set those core values and you create them not just as concepts and principles, but as behaviors. You're creating this intentional culture. Very often what happens is you're going to get, especially in newer organizations, entrepreneurial organizations, very early stage especially, you're going to get a lot of these other ones. The happy accident, which you can see is high health, but low intentionality. Right? That's just what that is. It's an accident, right? But the problem with that is you can't live in that happy world forever. As an organization grows and scales and new people come in, if you're not intentional about that, you're going to bring in people that aren't a fit for your culture. Next thing you know, you're going to be in chaotic culture over here. And that's not good. That's not healthy, and it wasn't intentional. So we have to be intentional about that. Command and control is the other side. It's high intentionality, but with low health. So you can imagine what that is. That's the dictatorship, right? That's the person who's trying to enforce their will on everything. This is at the corporate level, the leadership level, being very intentional about setting corporate culture within an organization. But you can actually drive it down a little bit. I don't know if you've ever seen this one. There's a couple of different versions of this that are out there. This is the one that I like. But this is people within the organization. So how do they actually perform? And so what you're looking at here on the x-axis is you're looking at performance. On the y-axis, you're looking at core values. And so obviously we want stars, high performers, high core value fit. Those are people that are living, the perfect life for your organization. And by the way, if you're a Radical Candor fan, I believe that there, like Kim Scott says, I believe there are two types of stars here. There are rock stars and there are superstars over here. So I'm not going to get into that, but there are different types of stars, different types of high performers and high core value fit. The next great thing is if you don't have that, then you want the puppies because they're high core value fit. Their performance is a little bit low, but we could probably train them up. And there's a lot of data that talks about, let's call them average or underperformers, and to take an underperformer in an organization the key to it is an underperformer who's also high core value fit. Because if they're low core value fit and low performer, that's a different issue. That's a rat over here in the lower left. But if they're high core value fit, so they're really good culturally for the organization, but they're underperforming, you actually get the greatest impact by training them up. Because it's usually something that we did. It's an environment that we as the leaders and the managers created that we can have impact on. So if we can train up those people by creating a different environment, they usually come into the average or high average very quickly, very easily. That's the greatest place where you want to spend your time looking for performance improvements in an organization. The rats are the low core values, low performance people. Those people, they're called rats because when you shine a light on them, they typically go scurrying away. They eventually jump ship. The hard people over here are really the terrorists, high performance but low core value fit, right? And so we've seen this. The one that I typically see this is that high producing salesperson who just doesn't follow anything in the company. They just really go around making everyone angry and frustrated. They don't follow policy procedure. They grumble. They're a bit toxic, right? These people, they're called terrorists for a reason. And the interesting thing about this is that if you have stars and they have to work with terrorists, eventually your stars leave because your terrorists are really chasing them away. So, what I wanted to do is show you how you can look at core values and performance at the higher level. What's our intentionality? What's our intent with creating culture in an organization? But then once we start to do that, what do the people look like within that culture? And notice core values exists on both sides. So it's cultural intentionality as well as individual intentionality. I just threw a lot at you there too.
Those were really, really useful. And I think, for those who are listening who weren't able to watch, we'll link to both of those graphics in the show notes if that's possible, Michael. If you could send those, that would be great to link because those images are really, really helpful.
Absolutely.
So Zach, is there anything that you wanted to, before we ask the final question, anything else that any I's you want to dot, T's you want to cross before we wrap here?
No, maybe I'll say some final words after the last question. But, I think just the intentionality is so important, and working with people who are experts in the space can add tremendous amounts of value, in the business. And at the end of the day, I think most people are looking for security and freedom, right? Mm-hmm. So by implementing these strategies and having these hard conversations, there's actually a quote that I pulled up. And it's a Jim Rohn quote. I always like a good Jim Rohn quote. And it says that, your life does not get better by chance. It gets better by change. So we have to be very intentional about it to see the improvement in the results. But why don't we fire away with the final question for Michael, and then we'll wrap up after a wealth of knowledge we just got.
Yeah. Well, Michael, really enjoyed this conversation so far and would love to know, what does it mean to you to be wealthy?
Wealthy, I think it's what we were talking about before. It's that freedom, right? It's the freedom of finances, the ability to do things that perhaps my parents weren't able to do for me, things that I can do for my children and my family, or just life in general that my parents weren't able to do. But it's freedom of time, and having the ability to be intentional with my time and how and where I spend it and the relationships that I have. I think wealth is about, the more I think about it, and I guess the older I get, it's about those relationships and the time. The money helps, of course, because it helps to give you some of the ability to have the time, but it's much more about the relationships.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think that's well said. And I love how we ask that question at the end of every episode, and we have such different answers each time. Sometimes it's about money, but I think when people go a little bit deeper, it's usually about more than only that, even though, like you said, Michael, the money does help. Mike, you want to add anything at the end?
No, I was just having the insight before that there's a lot of parallels actually in what we spoke about today and the world of finances as well, namely around time being your friend, and that there isn't really a quick fix that like, all right, we came in and we implemented EOS and your company culture is taken care of. That a lot of times the systems take a little bit of time for them to really click into place. And if you operate on a long-term horizon, it becomes this really beautiful ally. So I love the way that we are able to merge the world of people, the world of finances. I see a lot of parallels in there.
Yeah, and I'll keep it short and sweet and just thank you, Michael Deutsch, for joining us and for sharing all that information. I truly believe that the listeners will get a lot of value and maybe reflect internally, about their lives, themselves, their businesses, if they're business owners, and how they can take their world to the next level. Vision and freedom and evolution. I think these are all things that people desire, and they're just buzzwords, right? Doing the hard work is what gets in the way of people actually coming to these realizations. And, I was thinking about it when you said that you have your educational time? What do you call it?
My educational research time.
Educational research time. It made me think of another quote, and this quote's by Jack Welch, and I'll end on this, and it's change before you have to, right?
Yeah.
I think we all need to be very intentional about creating the life that we want. So I think that's the great work that you're doing for people, though. So thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Hope you had fun.
It was great. I enjoyed it. As you can see, I get passionate about people.
Yeah.
Individuals, company, you name it. People is my passion area. So I had a great time speaking about it. Thank you for having me. Zach, Mike, thank you.
It was a blast sitting down with you, man. And to everyone who's listening, thank you so much. And Zach didn't say the thing that he normally says at the end, which is if you spent an hour with us, then that is a huge vote of confidence in yourself. Good for you for taking the time to educate yourself, to better yourself. And thank you for being along for the ride with us.
And that's why I surround myself with people like you, Mike, to remind me to say things like that. So thank you, everybody. Bye for now. And hi, everybody. This is Zach Smith, co-founder and CEO of I Am Financial and the co-host of The Other Side of the Coin. Please remember to subscribe and like. And if you have any questions and or would like to speak, please feel free to email me directly at zacksmith@im-financial.com. That is ZAK Smith at the letter I, the letter M-financial.com. Reach out to us and we will make certain to get you to the appropriate channels. Thank you again, and we hope you enjoyed our show. See you next time. Disclosures. This podcast is for informational purpose only and is not to be construed as tax, legal, or investment advice. Although the information has been gathered from sources believed to be reliable, please note that individual situations can vary. Therefore, the information should be relied upon only when coordinated with individual professional advice. Guest speakers and the firms are not affiliated with or endorsed by Park Avenue Securities, Guardian, Northeast Financial Network, and I Am Financial, and the opinions stated are their own. Guardian, its subsidiaries, agents, and employees do not provide tax, legal, or accounting advice. Consult your tax, legal, and accounting professional regarding your individual situation. All investments and investment strategies contain risk and may lose value. OSJ address is 101 Crawford's Corner Road, Suite 2405 in Homedale, New Jersey, 07733. Their phone number is 908-709-0020. Our phone number is 914-603-8325. A member of the Northeast Financial Network, financial representative with Guardian Life Insurance Company of America, New York, New York, I Am Financial, and Northeast Financial Network are not affiliates or subsidiaries of Guardian. Arkansas license number 163-03838, California license number 4108463. Submission number 8659018.1, expiration 1227.